I watched my brother's face crumble as our father's attorney revealed the truth. The $4.2 million inheritance, the lake house, and the family business were now mine. 23 years of being the forgotten daughter, while Ryan was the golden. Son had finally come full circle. But let me start from the beginning. If my story of family betrayal and long-awaited justice resonates with you, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Trust me, what happened next in this family revenge drama will show you exactly why blood isn't always thicker than water. My name is Emily Winters, and for most of my life I was the forgotten child. I grew up in Milton, an affluent suburb of Boston, where my father Victor was known as one of the most successful real estate developers in Massachusetts. Our colonial-style house with its manicured lawns and swimming pool projected the image of the perfect American family. But behind those walls, there was a clear hierarchy, and I was at the bottom. My brother Ryan was 2 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, the difference in how we were treated was impossible to ignore. Ryan was the son my father had always wanted, the heir to carry on the Winters name and legacy. I was just there. An afterthought. A disappointment from the moment I was born female. Everything changed when I was 8 years old. My mother, Diane, was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer, and within 6 months, she was gone. I still remember the smell of lilies at her funeral, how my small hand clutched her pearl necklace that she had given me the night before she passed. "You're stronger than you know, Emily," she had whispered. Those were the last words she ever said to me. With Mum gone, the disparities between how Ryan and I were treated became even more pronounced. Ryan was enrolled in Lakeside Academy, the most prestigious private school in the area, while I attended the local public school. For his 13th birthday, Dad surprised Ryan with a brand new mountain bike and PlayStation. When my birthday came around the same month, I received a gift card to Barnes & Noble with a note signed by Dad's assistant. "Boys need more to succeed. In this world," my father would say whenever I gathered the courage to question the disparity. "Ryan has to learn how to run a business, manage money, make connections. You'll just get married someday." By the time I was 14, I had stopped asking. Instead, I threw myself into my studies, determined to prove my worth through academic excellence. While Ryan got private tutors whenever his grades slipped, I stayed up late studying on my own. When he joined expensive sports teams with all the latest equipment, I ran in the public park in second-hand sneakers. The most painful memory came on my 16th birthday. I had hinted for weeks that I wanted a small celebration, nothing extravagant, just acknowledgement that my milestone birthday mattered. The day came and went, without so much as a card from my father. When I came down to breakfast the next morning, eyes puffy from crying myself to sleep, Dad was already at the table reviewing blueprints for a new development. "Dad," I said, my voice small, "yesterday was my birthday." He glanced up, looking genuinely surprised. "Was it? Must have slipped." My mind with the Henderson project deadline. He pulled out his wallet and handed me a $50 bill. "Get yourself something nice." 3 weeks later, Ryan's 18th birthday was celebrated with a party at the country club. Dad invited all his business associates, made a touching speech about his pride in his son, and presented him with keys to a brand new BMW. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, wondering what was so fundamentally wrong with me that my own father couldn't love me. Was it because I looked like my mother? Was it because I wasn't loud and charismatic like Ryan? Or was it simply because I was a girl? By senior year of high school, I knew better than to expect support for college. While Ryan had been shipped off to Princeton with a generous monthly allowance, despite his mediocre grades, I applied to schools knowing I'd have to figure out funding on my own. When my acceptance letter from Boston State University arrived with a partial academic scholarship, my father barely looked up from his dinner. "State school, huh? Well, at least it's affordable." That night I made a promise to myself. I would succeed not because of my family, but despite them, and someday they would regret underestimating Emily Winters. My college years were a blur of exhaustion and determination. While Ryan posted Instagram photos from yacht parties and ski trips during his time at Princeton, I was working double shifts to keep myself afloat. My partial scholarship covered tuition, but everything else, housing, books, food, transportation, came out of my pocket. I landed a job at the campus library that gave me the morning and afternoon shifts, then waited tables at Romano's, an Italian restaurant near campus, from 5 p.m. until closing at midnight. Between classes and work, I averaged about 5 hours of sleep a night. During my first semester, I fell asleep during 3 different lectures and nearly failed microeconomics. Professor Jenkins, my economics teacher, called me to his office after I dozed off during his midterm review. "Miss Winters, I notice you're struggling to stay awake in my class, yet your assignment work shows tremendous potential." His kind eyes took in my exhausted appearance. "Is everything all right?" That simple question of genuine concern broke something in me. I explained my situation, the 2 jobs, the lack of family support, my determination to graduate debt-free. Instead of the disciplinary warning I expected, Professor Jenkins arranged for me to have access to the faculty lounge for naps between classes and connected me with a better-paying research assistant position. That small act of kindness changed everything. With slightly better pay and more flexible hours, I could finally focus on my studies. I discovered a natural aptitude for finance and accounting, particularly forensic accounting, following the money trail to uncover discrepancies and fraud. There was something deeply satisfying about using numbers to uncover truth and restore justice. Meanwhile, Ryan's college experience was following a predictable trajectory. He pledged to his father's old fraternity, barely attended classes, and scraped by with C's and the occasional B when a professor took pity on him. During holiday breaks when we were both home, he'd brag about his connections and the job offers that would be waiting for him, regardless of his grades. "College is really about who you know, Em," he'd say, using the nickname I hated. "All this studying you do is just sad." In his junior year, Ryan crashed his BMW while driving drunk from a fraternity party. Rather than face consequences, our father had him quietly withdrawn from Princeton and immediately installed him as a junior executive at Winters Development. No degree required, apparently, when nepotism was on the table. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in accounting and finance. My graduation ceremony fell on the same day as an important groundbreaking for one of Dad's new developments. He sent his regrets via text message and a $200 Amazon gift card via email. My roommate's parents took photos of me in my cap and gown and invited me to their celebration dinner. I smile in every picture, but my eyes tell the truth. Where was my family when I achieved something remarkable? My first job after college was at Martin & Associates, a small accounting firm in downtown Boston. The starting salary was modest, but it was enough for me to rent a tiny apartment with 2 roommates in Somerville. For the first time in my life, I had my own space, my own money, and the freedom to make my own choices without the constant reminder of my second-class status in the Winters family. Ryan, meanwhile, was given the penthouse apartment in one of Dad's luxury buildings, a company car, and a 6-figure salary for a job he was wholly unqualified for. At the rare family dinners I still attended, he would hold court about his business deals and development projects, taking credit for our father's work while I sat quietly, never mentioning my own growing success and expertise. "Emily's still doing that number-crunching thing," he'd say dismissively if anyone asked about me. "Nothing exciting like real estate development." I would smile tightly and change the subject. Let them underestimate me, I thought. Their ignorance was becoming my greatest advantage. Over the next 5 years, our paths continued to diverge, mine steadily upward, Ryan's increasingly erratic. I poured all my energy into building my career, advancing from junior accountant to senior financial analyst at Martin & Associates. My specialization in forensic accounting caught the attention of larger firms, and by my 4th year I was headhunted by Sullivan, Price & Morgan, one of Boston's most prestigious financial investigation firms. My salary doubled. I moved from my shared apartment to a small but beautiful 1-bedroom in Cambridge, with a bay window and built-in bookshelves. For the first time since leaving home, I bought new furniture instead of second-hand pieces. I started building an emergency fund, then a retirement account, then an investment portfolio. Financial security, I discovered, was its own form of freedom. All the while, Ryan was spiralling. What started as work hard, play hard, quickly became mostly play hard. He would show up to the office at noon, leave by 3, and spend his evenings at high-end bars and casinos. His expense reports, which I later discovered were approved without question, showed thousands spent on client entertainment that mysteriously always happened at the same few gentlemen's clubs. Dad seemed oblivious to Ryan's increasingly concerning behaviour, or perhaps, more accurately, he was willfully blind to it. When Ryan totaled his second company car, Dad replaced it with an even more expensive model. When complaints came in from female employees about Ryan's inappropriate comments, Dad had HR bury the reports. When Ryan's gambling debts mounted, Dad paid them off quietly. It was at a charity gala for Boston Children's Hospital that I met Thomas Kelly, a paediatric surgeon with kind eyes and a quick wit. He asked me about my work with genuine interest, never once looking over my shoulder for someone more important to talk to. A refreshing change from most social events in Boston. "Forensic accounting? That sounds fascinating," he said, actually meaning it. "So you're basically a financial detective?" "Something like that," I laughed. "I follow the money to find the truth. People can lie, but numbers usually don't." Our relationship developed slowly and thoughtfully. Thomas had his own demanding career, so he understood my work ethic and independence. Unlike other men I'd dated, he never seemed threatened by my ambition or financial self-sufficiency. Instead, he celebrated my promotions and encouraged me to aim even higher. "You're brilliant at what you do, Emily," he said one night over dinner at his place. "You could run your own firm someday if you wanted." Around this time, I was offered partnership track at Sullivan, Price & Morgan, an almost unheard-of advancement for someone my age. When I called my father to share the news, his secretary put me on hold for 15 minutes before coming back on the line. "I'm sorry, Emily, but Mr. Winters is in an important meeting. He asked me to take a message." I never called back with my news. Instead, I celebrated with Thomas and my small circle of close friends who had become the family I chose. 2 weeks later, I received a formal invitation to a family dinner at my father's house. These dinners happened perhaps twice a year, and I usually found an excuse to avoid them. But something told me I should attend this one. The evening was tense from the start. Dad looked older, his complexion greyish, and his breathing laboured. Ryan was clearly hungover, fidgeting and checking his phone constantly. When the housekeeper served the main course, Dad cleared his throat and tapped his water glass. "I've asked you both here tonight because I have an announcement," he said, looking directly at Ryan. "My doctor has advised me to reduce my workload, due to some cardiac concerns." My stomach dropped. Despite everything, he was still my father. "Are you okay?" I asked. He waved off my concern. "Just getting older. Nothing serious yet, but it's time to think about the future of Winter's development." Ryan straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. "I've decided that Ryan will be taking over as CEO effective next month," Dad continued. "I'll stay on as chairman of the board, but the day-to-day operations will be his responsibility." Ryan's face split into a triumphant grin. "I won't let you down, Dad." I sat in stunned silence. Ryan had done nothing to earn this position. The company my father had built from nothing, the company that employed hundreds of people, was being handed to someone who could barely manage his own checkbook. "Emily," my father said, finally acknowledging me, "I know you've done well in your, accounting work. Perhaps Ryan could use your services for the annual audit." It was meant as a consolation prize, I suppose, a bone thrown to the family dog. But all I could think was the company would be bankrupt within 2 years under Ryan's leadership. "Congratulations, Ryan," I said, forcing a smile. "Big responsibility." "The biggest," Dad agreed, clapping Ryan on the shoulder. "But he's a Winters. This company is his birthright, the family's only hope for the future." As if I didn't carry the same blood. As if I hadn't proven myself 1,000 times over. That night I cried for the first time in years, not from sadness, but from pure, unfiltered rage. I was done seeking approval from people who would never see my worth. What I didn't know then was that fate was about to deal a hand that would change everything, portent than the family we're born into. 3 months after that dinner, my father had his second heart attack. Despite our complicated relationship, I rushed to Massachusetts General Hospital as soon as Thomas called me with the news. He had been on shift in the ER when Dad was brought in. "It's serious, Emily," Thomas said, his voice gentle but clinical. "They're taking him to the cardiac unit now. You should come." I arrived to find Ryan already there, pacing outside the ICU. He looked terrible, unshaven, bloodshot eyes, designer clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them. "They're not telling me anything," he snapped when he saw me. "You're dating a doctor. Make yourself useful for once and find out what's going on." I ignored the jab and spoke to the charge nurse, who told me Dad was stabilised but unconscious. Only one visitor at a time was allowed in the room. "You go," I told Ryan. "I'll wait." While Ryan was inside, I stepped away to call Thomas for more information. As I was returning to the waiting area, I passed by Dad's room and froze when I heard my name. "Emily can't know about the arrangements," my father's voice, weak but urgent. "She'll try to contest everything." "Don't worry," Ryan replied. "We've made sure she's completely out of the picture. The lawyers said the new documents are ironclad." I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding. What arrangements? What documents? The forensic accountant in me immediately went on high alert. Something wasn't right. Over the next week, as Dad remained in the hospital, I began a careful investigation. I started with what public records I could access about Winter's development and my father's personal holdings. Nothing seemed immediately amiss, but there were gaps in the information: subsidiaries with vague business purposes, properties transferred between entities, large consultant payments to offshore companies. I called in a favour from a colleague at Sullivan, Price and Morgan, who specialised in real estate finance. She helped me identify several red flags in the company's recent transactions. "These patterns are consistent with someone moving money around to hide it," she told me. "If this were my case, I'd be looking for embezzlement." With this information, I took a calculated risk. I reached out to Jeremy Parks, a junior accountant at Winter's Development, who had worked with me briefly at Martin & Associates before being recruited by my father's company. "Emily, great to hear from you," he said when we met for coffee. "Are you finally coming to work for the family business?" I laughed and kept my tone casual. "Not exactly, but I am concerned about Dad after his heart attack. I'm trying to get a better understanding of the company's financial health, so he has one less thing to worry about during recovery." Jeremy hesitated. "I don't know if I should—" "Just between former colleagues," I assured him. "Nothing official. I'm worried Ryan might be in over his head with Dad sidelined." That struck a chord. "You have no idea," Jeremy said, lowering his voice. "It's been chaos since your brother took over. The books are a mess, and no one can question anything without risking their job." Over the next hour, Jeremy painted a disturbing picture of the company under Ryan's leadership. Projects running over budget, investors growing concerned, and, most troubling, large sums disappearing with minimal documentation. "There's this one account that only Ryan and your father have access to," Jeremy explained. "Millions have gone through it in the last few years, but it's marked as executive, discretionary fund in our system. When I asked about it during the last audit, I was told to ignore it." I thanked Jeremy for his time, promising to keep our conversation confidential. That night, I began compiling everything I had learned into a secure digital folder. If my suspicions were correct, Ryan wasn't just an incompetent executive, he was actively stealing from the company. But the real bombshell came 3 days later. I was reviewing some old family trust documents when I noticed a reference to a Diana Winters living trust established the year before my mother died. This was something I'd never heard of before. With growing unease, I dug deeper. Through a series of records requests and careful research, I uncovered the devastating truth. My mother had left a substantial inheritance specifically for me, money from her family, separate from the Winters' fortune. There had been a college fund, investment accounts, and even her personal jewellery collection, all designated solely for me in a trust that would activate when I turned 18. I never saw a penny of it. Further investigation revealed that shortly after my mother's death, my father had somehow gained control of these assets as the trustee. Over the years, he had systematically liquidated my inheritance, using it first to cover Ryan's expensive schooling, then his failed business ventures, gambling debts, and legal troubles. The final insult was discovering that my mother's sapphire earrings, the ones she wore on her wedding day and promised would be mine someday, had been given to Ryan's girlfriend of the month for her birthday 3 years ago. She had pawned them 6 weeks later after they broke up. Everything I had struggled for, my education, my apartment, my financial independence, should have been provided by the trust my mother left for me. While I worked double shifts and ate ramen noodles, my father and brother were spending my birthright. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by documents, tears streaming down my face as years of confusion finally made sense. This wasn't just about favoritism. This was theft. This was betrayal on a level I couldn't have imagined. I wonder if anyone watching has ever had that moment when everything you thought about your family suddenly shifts. That moment when you realize the struggle wasn't just bad luck, but actual sabotage from the people who should have protected you. If you've been there, drop a comment below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these family betrayals makes them slightly easier to bear. I'm about to share what happened next, and trust me, it gets even more unbelievable. Armed with evidence and burning with righteous anger, I went to confront my father at the hospital. He had been moved to a private room and was scheduled for bypass surgery the following week. I chose a time when I knew Ryan wouldn't be there. He had a standing tea time at the country club on Wednesday afternoons, heart attack or no heart attack. Dad was propped up in bed, looking frailer than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes were as sharp and cold as ever when I walked in. No warmth, no fatherly affection, just assessment, as if I were a property he was considering acquiring. "Emily, this is unexpected." I placed my folder of documents on his bed tray. "We need to talk about Mum's trust." His expression didn't change, but a slight tightening around his mouth told me all I needed to know. He'd hoped I would never find out. "What about it?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. "I know everything, Dad. The college fund she set up for me, the investments, her jewellery. I know you took it all and gave it to Ryan." He sighed, not with guilt but with irritation. "You were always too clever for your own good." "It was mine," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay composed. "Mum wanted me to have it. How could you steal from your own daughter?" Dad's face hardened. "Ryan is my son. He carries our name forward. He needed that money to establish himself properly." "And I didn't. I worked 2 jobs through college. I lived with roommates into my late 20s. I skipped meals to pay for textbooks. All while you were using my inheritance to bail Ryan out of his messes." "Ryan has potential," Dad said dismissively. "He just needs the right support. You were always going to be fine on your own." The cruel irony of his statement hit me like a slap. My self-sufficiency, born of necessity because of his neglect, was now being used as justification for that very neglect. "There's more," I said, pulling out specific documents. "The company's executive discretionary fund, Ryan's, been embezzling for years. Dad didn't even look at the papers." "I'm aware of Ryan's financial arrangements." I stared at him in disbelief. "You know? And you're letting it happen?" "It's my company, my money. I decide how it's used." The door opened then, and Ryan walked in, still in his golf clothes. He froze when he saw me, then quickly recovered, a smug smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, family reunion. What brings you here, Em? Finally concerned about the old man?" I held up the folder. "I know about Mum's trust. I know about the embezzlement." Ryan's smile faltered momentarily before he laughed. Always so dramatic. "Dad, is she bothering you with her conspiracy theories?" "She found out about Diana's trust," Dad said flatly. Ryan's demeanour changed instantly. He stepped toward me, suddenly menacing. "You've always been jealous of what I had. Now you're trying." To use Dad's health crisis to grab what isn't yours. What wasn't mine? I echoed incredulously. Mum left that money specifically for me. And Dad decided it would be better used for the family business, Ryan snapped. A business you've never shown any interest in until there was money to be claimed. I'm not interested in your business, I said. I'm interested in justice. In honouring what Mum wanted. Listen carefully, Emily, Ryan said, voice low and threatening. Drop this now. If you push this, I'll make sure you regret it. There are things you don't know about Mum that would break your perfect image of her. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you, as your brother. His expression was anything but brotherly. Some secrets should stay buried. Dad pressed the call button for the nurse. I think this visit is over. Emily, I'm changing my will tomorrow. To make everything crystal clear. Ryan will inherit everything, the business, the properties, all of it. If you contest it, you'll only waste your money on lawyers. The nurse arrived, frowning at the obvious tension in the room. Mr. Winters needs to rest now. I gathered my documents, hands shaking with rage and hurt. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Dad said with finality. It was over the day you were born a girl. I walked out of that hospital room knowing I had just been disowned in every way that mattered. The father I had spent my life trying to please had finally said the quiet part out loud. I had never had a chance at his love or approval because of my gender. That night, Thomas held me as I sobbed out 28 years of rejection and pain. You deserve better than them, Emily, he said when my tears finally subsided. But if you want to fight for what's rightfully yours, I'm behind you 100%. I sat up, wiping my eyes. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about my mother's wishes. It's about justice. Thomas kissed my forehead. Then we'll get justice. You're not alone in this fight. What I didn't know then was that I had more allies than I realised. People who had been waiting years for the chance to right the wrongs done by Victor Winters and his golden son. The morning after my confrontation with my father and Ryan, I received an unexpected email from Margaret Chen, my father's executive assistant for over 20 years. The message was brief. We need to talk, not at the office, the thinking cup. On Newbury, 2 p.m. today. Margaret had been a constant presence throughout my childhood, efficient, discreet, and seemingly loyal to my father. She had always been polite to me, but never particularly warm. I couldn't imagine what she wanted to discuss that required such secrecy. I arrived at the coffee shop early, choosing a table in the back corner. Margaret walked in precisely at 2 p.m., looking exactly as I remembered, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, silver-streaked black hair in a neat bun. But there was something different in her expression when she spotted me, a vulnerability I'd never seen before. Thank you for meeting me, Emily, she said, setting down her handbag. I've been waiting for this day for a very long time. What day is that exactly? I asked cautiously. Margaret folded her hands on the table. The day you finally discovered the truth about your mother's trust. My breath caught. You knew. I've known everything from the beginning. Her composure cracked slightly. And my silence has been the greatest regret of my life. Over the next hour, Margaret revealed a history I never could have imagined. She had been more than my father's assistant. She had been my mother's closest friend. They had met in college and remained confidants even after my mother married my father. Diana knew Victor favoured Ryan even when you were both small, Margaret explained. She tried to compensate by giving you extra attention, extra love, but she also worried about what would happen to you if anything happened to her. So she set up the trust, I said. Margaret nodded. She made me the successor trustee if anything happened to Victor, but after she died, he used legal manoeuvring to have me removed and himself appointed as sole trustee. I tried to fight it, but he was Victor Winters, I finished for her. Powerful, connected, ruthless. Yes. And I was a single mother with a son to support. He made it clear that if I caused problems, I would lose my job. So I stayed, silent, kept my position, and watched him systematically dismantle everything Diana had put in place for you. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. I told myself I was maintaining access, that I could at least keep an eye on things, preserve records, be a witness. But the truth is, I failed you, and I failed Diana. I reached across the table and took her hand. You were in an impossible position. She squeezed my hand gratefully before reaching into her bag. I haven't come empty-handed, Emily. I've been keeping things for you, things your mother wanted you to have. Margaret pulled out a sealed envelope and slid it across the table. Your mother left letters for you, one for your 18th birthday, one for your college graduation, one for your wedding day. Victor found them after she died and ordered me to destroy them. I made copies and returned the originals to him to burn, but I kept the copies safe. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope to find 3 smaller envelopes, each labelled in my mother's handwriting. The sight of it, those familiar loops and curves I hadn't seen in 20 years, brought fresh tears to my eyes. There's more, Margaret continued. Diana suspected that Victor might try to circumvent her wishes regarding your inheritance. She was smarter than he gave her credit for. She created contingencies. What kind of contingencies? For one thing, she recorded conversations with Victor, where he explicitly agreed to the terms of her separate trust for you. She also established a secondary trust that even I didn't know the details of until recently. And she left all the documentation with her personal attorney, a man Victor never knew about. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time since discovering the betrayal. These recordings, they still exist? Margaret smiled. James Kim has kept everything in his safekeeping for 20 years. He's been waiting for you to come looking. But why didn't he contact me when I turned 18, when the trust should have been activated? He tried. He sent letters to your father's house that you never received. He called and was told you weren't interested in dredging up the past. Eventually, Diana's instructions were to wait until you sought answers yourself. She believed that when the time was right, you would. I sat back, overwhelmed. My mother prepared for this. She knew what he might do. She knew who she married, Emily. She loved Victor, but she had no illusions about his character or his favouritism. She was determined to protect you, even after she was gone. Margaret wrote down contact information for James Kim, then hesitated, before adding, "There's one more thing you should know. Your mother's family had significantly more money than the Winters ever did. The trust she established for you, if it had been properly managed all these years, would be worth more than Winters' development and all your father's properties combined." The revelation stunned me. All these years, I had believed the narrative, that my father was the wealthy, successful one, and my mother had been fortunate to marry him. Like so much else, that too had been a lie. As Margaret prepared to leave, she placed a small velvet pouch on the table. I couldn't save everything, but I managed to secure these before Ryan could get his hands on them. Inside the pouch was my mother's wedding ring, and a silver locket I remembered her wearing often. I opened the locket to find a tiny photo of my mother holding me as a baby, both of us smiling at the camera. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching. "The locket. For everything." Margaret stood, composing herself back into the efficient assistant I had always known. "I've submitted my resignation to Winter's development, effective immediately. After all these years, I'm finally keeping my promise to Diana." She smiled sadly. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become, Emily. So proud." As I watched her walk away, I felt a profound shift within me. I was no longer just fighting for myself, for justice, for what was rightfully mine. I was fighting for my mother, for her wishes, her legacy, her final acts of love for a daughter she knew she would leave too soon. That afternoon, I called James Kim's office and scheduled an appointment for the following morning. The game had changed, and for the first time, I was playing with a full deck. James Kim's office was nothing like the glossy, intimidating spaces occupied by my father's attorneys. Located in a converted brownstone in Back Bay, it was warm and inviting, with well-worn leather chairs and bookshelves lined with legal tomes. Kim himself was in his 70s, with kind eyes behind round glasses and a deliberate way of speaking that immediately put me at ease. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you, Emily," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "You look remarkably like your mother." The comment, delivered with such genuine warmth, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. In my father's house, comparisons to my mother had been rare and usually unfavourable. "Thank you for keeping everything safe all these years," I said. Kim nodded solemnly. It was the last promise I made to Diana. She was convinced that someday you would need protection from Victor's tendencies. Over the next 3 hours, Kim laid out the full extent of my mother's foresight. The primary trust, the one my father had looted, was only part of her plan. There was a second, secret trust established through her family's bank in Switzerland, triggered not by age, but by specific actions. Your mother stipulated that if Victor ever attempted to divert funds from your primary trust, this secondary trust would activate with additional provisions, Kim explained, showing me the documents, including a clause that would give you controlling interest in Winter's development. I stared at him in disbelief. How is that possible? The company was always my father's. Not entirely. When your parents married, Diana's family actually provided the initial capital for Victor to start the business. In exchange, they received 40% of the shares, which Diana inherited when her parents passed away. She transferred those shares into this trust for you. The revelation was staggering. For years I had believed my father's narrative that he had built his empire from nothing. In reality, my mother's family had given him his start. "There's more," Kim continued. "Diana suspected Victor might try to hide or transfer assets if he ever faced financial or legal troubles. So she included a provision that any attempt to fraudulently transfer company assets would trigger an automatic audit and freezing of accounts." I thought of the embezzlement Ryan had been engaged in with my father's knowledge. And if that audit found evidence of financial crimes, Kim smiled grimly, then the trust would have grounds to assume control of the company under the shareholder protection clause. For the first time, I allowed myself to envision a path to justice that was more than just symbolic. With these documents and my forensic accounting skills, I could potentially reclaim not just my inheritance, but the entire company my father and brother had corrupted. "I want to proceed," I told Kim, "but I need to do this right. I'll pay for your services from my own savings." Kim waved this off. "Your mother's trust has been accumulating funds for legal expenses for 20 years. And besides," he added with a small smile, "I've been waiting 2 decades to see Victor Winters face the consequences of his actions. Consider this my retirement project." Over the next 3 months, we built our case meticulously. I hired a forensic accounting team from a firm that competed with mine to avoid any conflict of interest. I took a leave of absence from Sullivan, Price and Morgan, explaining to my partners only that I was dealing with a complex family situation. Thomas was my rock throughout the process. He brought dinner to my apartment on late nights when I was buried in financial records, listened as I processed waves of anger and grief, and never once suggested that I should simply let it go for my own peace of mind. "This isn't just about money," he said one night as we sat surrounded by documents. "This is about honouring your mother and reclaiming your place in your own story." Not everyone was as supportive. Ryan began to sense that something was happening. He started with texts that attempted to sound casual. "Haven't heard from you in a while. Dad's asking about you." When I didn't respond, the messages grew threatening. "Whatever you think you're doing, you'll regret it. Some things should stay buried, Emily." I forwarded each message to Kim, who added them to our growing file. The most difficult part of this period was maintaining my silence and focus when every instinct screamed for immediate confrontation. I wanted to storm into my father's office and throw the evidence in his face. I wanted to publicly expose Ryan's embezzlement. I wanted the world to know how they had betrayed not just me, but my mother's memory. Instead, I followed Kim's advice. The best revenge is methodical and legally unassailable. We're not just winning a battle, we're winning the war. My obsession with the case began to take a toll on my relationship with Thomas. We had our first serious fight 6 weeks into the investigation, when I cancelled our weekend getaway to Cape Cod because I needed to review new documents from the forensic accountants. I understand this is important, Thomas said, frustration evident in his voice. But you're burning yourself out. This case is consuming you. It has to, I insisted. This is my one chance to make things right. And after that? What happens when this is over, Emily? Will you know how to live without this fight driving you? His question hit uncomfortably close to home. For months, my entire identity had become wrapped up in this legal battle. I had stopped seeing friends, taken leave from my job, even neglected basic self-care. My apartment was littered with takeout containers and post-it notes. I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed or thought about anything beyond the case. Thomas's concern served as a wake-up call. I made an effort to create boundaries. No casework on Sunday mornings, which became our sacred time for farmers' market visits and lazy brunches. I resumed my weekly runs along the Charles River. Small steps toward remembering that regardless of the outcome, I would need to have a life after this battle. Just as our case was nearly ready to file, my father died. The news came via text. Message from Ryan. Dad gone. Heart gave out this morning. Funeral Friday. The simple message hit me with unexpected force. Despite everything, he was my father. There would be no reconciliation now, no moment of reckoning where he would face what he had done to me. No chance, however slim, of hearing him say he was sorry or that he had been wrong. Ryan wasted no time. The day after the funeral, which I attended silently at the back of the church, ignored by Ryan and the family friends who took their cues from him, I received a certified letter from Winters Development's corporate attorneys. All my father's assets had been transferred to Ryan before his death. The company, the properties, everything. I was explicitly excluded from any inheritance. Furthermore, I was formally banned from entering any Winters Development property, including my father's home, under threat of trespassing charges. It was a complete excommunication, designed to erase me from the family history entirely. Ryan clearly thought he had won. What he didn't know was that his actions had just triggered the exact conditions my mother's secondary trust had been designed to address. The chess game was entering its final phase, and Ryan had no idea he had just put himself in check. 2 weeks after my father's funeral, Ryan and his attorneys arranged what they called an official reading of the will at the offices of Winters Development's longtime legal counsel, Bradshaw and Werner. I knew it was theatre, legal will readings, are largely a fiction created by television, and the certified letter had already made the terms clear. This was Ryan's victory lap, his chance to publicly cement his status as the sole heir to the Winters fortune. I received an invitation with obvious reluctance on their part. The email specified that I could bring one representative, but stated explicitly that no challenges to the will would be entertained at the meeting. This is merely an informational session regarding the final wishes of Victor Winters, which were established with sound mind and proper legal procedure. When I forwarded the invitation to James Kim, his response was immediate. Perfect. Exactly what we've been waiting for. On the appointed day, I arrived at Bradshaw and Werner's downtown offices with James Kim beside me and Thomas waiting supportively in a cafe across the street. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a tailored black suit that projected both mourning and business competence, with my mother's locket visible at my throat. The conference room was filled with exactly who I expected. Ryan, looking smugly confident in an ill-fitting designer suit, Geoffrey Bradshaw, my father's longtime attorney, 2 junior lawyers from the firm, and Carson Miller, the new CFO Ryan had appointed after forcing out the previous one who had questioned his financial decisions. Ryan's smile when I walked in was pure condescension. Emily. And who's this? He glanced dismissively at James. Kim. My attorney, James Kim. Ryan snorted. A bit late for that, don't you think? Everything's been settled. I took my seat without responding. James placed his briefcase on the table and began removing folders with methodical precision. Geoffrey Bradshaw called the meeting to order. We're here today to formally review the last will and testament of Victor Alexander Winters, as executed on March 17th of this year. What followed was exactly as expected, a detailed accounting of how every asset my father owned had been left to Ryan, with specific language excluding me from any claim to the estate. The corporate structure had been reorganised to give Ryan complete control. My father had even taken the time to specify that personal items of sentimental value only were also to go to Ryan exclusively. When Bradshaw finished reading, Ryan looked at me with an expression of pure triumph. "I think that's quite clear, don't you, Emily? Nothing for you to contest." James Kim cleared his throat. "Actually, if I may interject at this point, we have some additional documentation that bears on these matters." Ryan's lawyer frowned. "This meeting is simply to inform all parties of the will's contents, not to introduce new materials." "Nevertheless," Kim continued smoothly, "I believe you'll find these documents directly relevant. They concern a prior claim that supersedes Mr. Winters' will." He distributed folders to everyone at the table. "What you have before you is the Diana Winters Living Trust, established 22 years ago, along with subsequent legal documentation showing that Victor Winters improperly accessed and misappropriated assets that were held in trust for Emily Winters." Ryan flipped through the pages with growing agitation. "This is nonsense. Dad had every right to manage family assets as he saw fit." "Not these assets," Kim replied. "As you'll see on page 3, these were separate property belonging to Diana Winters, placed in trust specifically for her daughter. Victor Winters was merely the trustee, not the beneficiary. His use of these funds for other purposes constituted a breach of fiduciary duty and triggered certain contingency provisions." Bradshaw was scanning the documents with increasing alarm. "Where did these come from? Why weren't they disclosed during probate?" "They were held in trust with my firm," Kim explained. "And they weren't relevant to probate, because they concern assets that were never part of Victor Winters' estate to begin with." Kim pulled out another folder. "Additionally, we have evidence that Ryan Winters, with Victor Winters' knowledge and approval, has been systematically embezzling from Winters' development for the past 5 years. Ryan's face flushed dark red. "That's a lie. Dad approved every expenditure." "Indeed he did," I said, speaking for the first time. "That's part of the problem. The board and shareholders were never informed of these expenditures, which included paying off your gambling debts and buying luxury items for various girlfriends." Kim continued relentlessly. "Furthermore, we have documentation showing that Diana Winters' family provided the initial capital for Winters' development in exchange for a 40% ownership stake that was subsequently placed in trust for Emily. Those shares, combined with voting rights triggered by the financial malfeasance clauses in the trust, give Emily controlling interest in the company." The room fell silent. Ryan stared at the documents in front of him, his expression moving from disbelief to rage. "This is a setup. You forged these documents. The trust has been on file with the state for over 20 years, Kim replied calmly. "The recordings of Victor agreeing to its terms have been authenticated by 2 independent experts, and the forensic accounting report detailing the embezzlement has been prepared by Anderson Consulting, one of the most respected firms in the industry." Ryan turned to his lawyer, who was still reading through the materials with growing concern. "Tell them this is bullshit. Tell them Dad's will overrides all of this." The lawyer looked up, his expression grim. "Mr. Winters, I think we need to take a recess and review these materials more thoroughly." "What?" Ryan exploded. "You're my lawyer. Tell them they can't do this." "Actually," the lawyer said quietly, "I'm the company's lawyer, and if what's in these documents is accurate, the company may have exposure to significant liability, including potential criminal charges." Ryan's face went from red to white. "Criminal charges? What are you talking about?" The lawyer stood, gathering his materials. "Mr. Winters, I strongly advise you not to say anything further at this time. We need to consult with criminal defense." Counsel before continuing this discussion. "Criminal defense? I don't need a criminal defense lawyer. This is my company." As Ryan's lawyer hurriedly exited, presumably to call for reinforcements, Ryan turned on me with naked hatred. You think you've won? You think you can waltz in here with some ancient paperwork and take everything I've worked for? Everything. You've worked for? I repeated incredulously. Ryan, you've never worked for anything in your life. You were handed opportunities I had to fight for. You squandered money that should have been mine. You betrayed not just me, but Mum's memory. You have no idea what you're talking about. Mum loved me. She loved both of us, I said quietly. The difference is, she knew Dad would always favour you. She was trying to level the playing field, to make sure I wasn't left with nothing. And Dad stole even that from me. Ryan slammed his hands on the table. This isn't over, Emily. I'll fight this with every penny in the company treasury. That's the thing, Ryan, I replied. It's not your money to spend anymore. As of this morning, the board has voted to suspend you pending a full investigation. Your accounts have been frozen. Your access to company systems revoked. The board can't do that. I own the company. No, I said. You don't. And you never did. Ryan lunged across the table, his face contorted in fury, but the CFO and remaining lawyer quickly restrained him. You bitch! You've ruined everything! I'll make you pay for this. As they struggled to control Ryan, James Kim calmly gathered our materials. I believe we're done here for today. You'll be hearing from us regarding next steps in the legal process. As we walked out, Ryan's shouts echoed down the hallway. This was never about justice for you, Emily. This was about revenge. I paused in the doorway and looked back at my brother, this stranger who shared my blood but had never been my family. You're wrong, Ryan. This was never about the money. It was about the truth. 6 months after that fateful meeting in the attorney's office, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. As the new majority shareholder and CEO of Winters Development, I spent my days navigating the challenges of restructuring a company that had been mismanaged for years. The learning curve was steep, but my background in finance and forensic accounting proved invaluable as I worked to implement transparent practices and rebuild relationships with investors and employees. Ryan faced multiple criminal charges for embezzlement and financial fraud. His assets were frozen, his reputation in ruins. He had been offered a plea deal that would reduce his potential prison time but require full restitution of the stolen funds. Last I heard, he was still refusing to accept it, convinced that his charm and connections would somehow save him in trial. We no longer spoke. After his outburst at the will reading, he had attempted to contact me several times, first with threats, then with pathetic appeals to family loyalty. I had blocked his number and instructed security not to allow him entry to any company properties. The break was clean and final. One of my first acts as CEO was to establish the Diana, Winters Scholarship Fund for underprivileged young women pursuing careers in business and finance. Each year, the fund would provide full tuition and living expenses for 5 women who, like me, had the drive and intelligence to succeed but lacked the financial support to do so. It felt like the perfect way to honour my mother's memory and extend her protective spirit to others. My relationship with Thomas had weathered the storm of the legal battle and emerged stronger. After months of living in crisis mode, we were finally able to enjoy simple pleasures together again. Weekend hikes in the White Mountains, cooking elaborate meals in my kitchen, planning a future that no longer revolved around righting past wrongs. "I'm proud of you," he told me one evening, as we sat on the deck of the lake house, my mother's family property that had been part of my reclaimed inheritance. Not just for winning, but for how you've handled the aftermath. I leaned into his embrace, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. What do you mean? You could have fired everyone associated with your father and brother. You could have disbanded the company and sold off the assets. You had every right to burn it all down after what they did to you. I considered this. Revenge wasn't the point. Building something better is. And I was building something better. Under my leadership, Winters Development had pivoted toward sustainable building practices and affordable housing initiatives alongside its luxury developments. I had promoted Margaret Chen to COO, valuing her institutional knowledge and unwavering ethical stance. the corporate culture was slowly shifting from the toxic, male-dominated environment my father had created to something more inclusive and innovative. Not all my decisions were strictly business. Through the legal discovery process, I had learned that Ryan had fathered a child 3 years earlier with his college girlfriend Melissa. When she told him she was pregnant, he had paid for her to go away with a settlement that included a strict non-disclosure agreement. I tracked down Melissa and her daughter, my niece Lily, living modestly in a small apartment in Rhode Island. Our first meeting was awkward, but ultimately healing. Melissa had been told the Winters family wanted nothing to do with her or her child. I assured her that wasn't true, at least not for me. "She looks like our mom," I told Melissa, watching 2-year-old Lily stack blocks on the living room floor. Same eyes. I established a trust fund for Lily's education and helped Melissa find a better job with one of our company's partners. We had Sunday dinners together twice a month, building a new kind of family connection based on choice rather than obligation. One rainy Saturday afternoon, as I was sorting through boxes of my mother's belongings that had been kept in storage, I discovered a sealed envelope with my name written on it in her handwriting. Unlike the milestone letters Margaret had saved, for me this one was dated just 3 days before she died. With trembling hands I opened it. "My darling Emily. If you're reading this, then everything I feared has come to pass, but you have found your way through it. I always knew you would. From the moment you were born, I recognized in you a strength that neither Victor nor Ryan possesses, a quiet resilience that comes from your core. I'm making arrangements to protect you financially, but money is the least of what I want to leave you. More than anything, I want to leave you with the knowledge that you were loved completely, exactly as you are. Your father's inability to see your worth was his greatest failure, not yours. I won't be there to see the woman you become, but I know she will be extraordinary. Trust yourself, fight for what's right, and remember that family is not always defined by blood. All my love, always. Mum." Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread her words. All those years of feeling invisible, unwanted, less than, and all along she had seen me, really seen me, and she had loved what she saw. I took the letter to the lake house that weekend and read it to Thomas as we sat by the fire. "She knew," I said wonderingly. She knew exactly what would happen, and she still believed I'd find my way through. Thomas wrapped his arms around me. Mothers usually do know their children best. In the months that followed, I continued the painstaking work of renovating the lake house to restore it to what my mother had envisioned. I removed my father's hunting trophies and dark leather furniture, replacing them with bright, airy spaces filled with books and art. The master bedroom, where my parents had slept, during summer vacations, was the last room I tackled. As the contractors removed the heavy oak headboard my father had installed, they discovered a small compartment in the wall behind it. Inside was a small blue journal with a note taped to the cover. "For Emily, when she's ready." The journal contained my mother's private thoughts during her illness, her fears, her hopes, her plans for protecting me. The final entry, dated the day before she died, read simply, "I've done everything I can for her. I have to believe it will be enough. I have to believe she will find her way back to this place someday and know that she was never forgotten, never unloved." On the 1-year anniversary of the will reading that had changed everything, I visited my mother's grave for the first time since reclaiming my inheritance. I brought fresh lilies, her favourite, and sat beside the elegant marble headstone for hours, telling her everything that had happened, how her foresight had saved me, how I was honouring her memory through my work and my life choices. "I want you to know I'm building a different kind of family," I told her. "One where no child feels less valuable than another. One where love isn't conditional on gender or achievement. I think you'd be proud of that." As I stood to leave, I placed my hand on the cool marble. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mum. Thank you for making sure I found my way home." The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear. Running a major company had never been my ambition, and some days I wondered if I should sell my shares and return to the work I had loved in forensic accounting. My relationship with Thomas was growing serious. with talk of marriage and children of our own someday. There were still moments when the old pain of rejection would surface unexpectedly, reminding me that healing isn't linear. But for the first time in my life, I was making choices from a position of strength rather than deprivation. The desperate need for approval that had driven me for so long had been replaced by something quieter and more sustainable, a deep knowledge of my own, worth that no one could take away. That, I realised, was my mother's greatest gift to me. Not the money, not the company, not even the justice she had so carefully orchestrated from beyond the grave. Her greatest gift was making sure I knew I had been loved, completely and unconditionally, by at least one parent. In the end, that was enough. Has your family ever taught you unexpected lessons about justice or your own worth? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story of family betrayal and long-awaited karma resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories of family dynamics and healing. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but important truths. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember, sometimes the family,